Welcome to Unification Approaches to Peace. As you have already seen from the initial announcement, this is really a special course in the entire program because it's the one core course that deals exclusively with the contribution of our unification movement and of our founders, our true parents, to the cause of peace. Whereas the rest of the program is really to train you, any student, as peace scholars or peace activists in a general sense, just like any other program would. This course is about what we specifically contribute. And because of that, it might be of particular interest to you. Now, here are two prerequisites. The first one is Peace and Conflict Studies. That's a course I teach myself at this time in the fall, and some of you must have taken it with me. And the second one is Conflict Analysis and Transformation. The first one gives you a general idea of what peace studies is about. It's a basic literacy in peace studies. The second one is a much more practical application of all the things discovered in the first one. How do we actually practice conflict transformation? How do we transform conflicts practically? What are the tools? And again, this is not just about what unificationists do, but what peace activists and peace scholars around the world have been doing for quite a while, for decades now. So these two courses give you a basis, a foundation for the program. And the current course is meant logically to come on top of the first two courses. You know how it's done generally, and now you learn what unificationism does. And most of you will take the courses in that order, but not everybody. I put here logic is not everything because at least the usual way we see things to be logical is not necessarily always what works best, you know. And if you start with this course, you don't need to feel like you have missed out on what you should have done before, because you can also start this way. There's another approach to logic. You start with the specific application to unificationism, and then later you will go back in time and look how others have been doing it. It doesn't matter too much, but I just wanted to give you a sense for the way it's ideally meant to be done. Now, going back to what was discussed and specifically the course on peace and conflict studies, just very briefly, a reminder, and especially for those who didn't take the course, peace and conflict studies has really started at the end of World War II because there was a sense, you know, World War I was terribly destructive with all kinds of, at that time, new means of destruction. Then World War II brought it to an entirely different level still, and especially with the nuclear weapons that suddenly appeared, totally destructive, and the beginning of the Cold War between two and then more nations that had these nuclear weapons, and the perspective for an end of humankind if we don't make peace for good. That led in particular to the creation of the United Nations. So that's the very basic background of peace studies, because with that in place, the United Nations, which is a worldwide entity meant to help nations come together and resolve issues without the use of force. That naturally brought with itself revival, or actually the creation of a body of thought and activism specifically aimed at making peace possible. That's what we call peace studies or peace and conflict studies, same thing. And building on, of course, efforts towards peace that have existed for centuries and millennia, in particular based on the teachings of the major world religions that all teach love and peace. Now, the events that took place, again, it's just a very short overview, involve a certain number of key events. There was first the Korean War, which took place just a few years after the end of World War II. I mean, uh, Douglas MacArthur, who was the Supreme Commander of the Allied forces in Japan at the end of World War II, was still there. It was just 3 years after the end of the war. We had the Korean War. Then a little bit later, the Vietnam War. Then in the United States, the US civil rights movement led by Martin Luther King, whose day is celebrated in the US in January every year. Then at the same time, around the same time, there was the end of colonialism. All or practically all uh, colonies in Africa and elsewhere that mostly Europe had became free, independent. But that did not mean necessarily the end of imperialism. A new form of colonialism emerged or continued to exist alone, economic imperialism, if you will, or many ways in which one part of the world was still dominating the rest. So it's not completely the end of colonialism to this day. And then the collapse of the Soviet Union. That was the last major event in the early 1990s. So all this accompanied the creation of peace studies and its development until today. Now, what is interesting is that except for the first and the last, the Korean War, the collapse of the Soviet Union, these events implied an attitude that was critical of US policy, both inside and outside of the United States, meaning an attitude of peace studies that was anti-establishment. So that explains that much of peace studies is liberal to left-oriented and often critical of the United States, which is sometimes problematic because it's sometimes done in the name of other systems that are much worse, such like the Soviet Union, Communist China, and so on. But it's not necessarily always unjustified. If you take the three here, specifically the civil rights movement in the United States, led by Martin Luther King, was very necessary. It was a good thing. But of course, sometimes after Martin Luther King, it went into took on a much more aggressive form that was really destructive and was probably not always a very good thing. The end of colonialism and imperialism is a very necessary thing, and our parents have said that many times. But of course, sometimes it tended to replace the influence of the West with an even more destructive influence. So it's a so-so situation. And I wanted to especially to remember that that has affected the way peace studies and the peace movements have tried to achieve peace. Now, what about HJI and peace studies? Why do we have peace studies? And why generally does the unification movement have peace studies? And how do we look at it? And how is it different? So you may or may not remember, depending on your age, that at the time when all this appeared, and the first time unificationism used peace in the name of one of its organizations. Now the word peace is everywhere, but that was in 1973 with the Professors World Peace Academy. And it was sometimes difficult for those who were involved in it, as I was at that time, to convince people that we were not the Soviet front, because the Soviet Union used peace all the time. What they meant is just anti-America, block America from from dominating world affairs. So let's make peace. That means encourage America to stop trying to counter what we are trying to do, which is definitely not peaceful. So yeah, peace was almost a dirty word. And when True Father initiated PWPA, this was even for unificationists, wow, peace. What do we mean by that? And then, of course, the kind of peace was very different. It's the peace that we now defend in all our organizations, a peace based on love, forgiveness, embracing the other, etc. So it's not a peace that's controlled by an unprincipled left or other unprincipled people. So that's I can identify or identify three reasons why, therefore, it is good, and it was good even then, to start working for peace, is because, first of all, even peace studies are not completely controlled by the left. Secondly, even if people initially start working from a wrong perspective, we have in the divine principle in unification thought this notion that the false precedes the true. In other words, the first type of peace studies that has appeared out there was maybe a little bit directed in a undesirable direction. Well, time for somebody else to come, correct it, and do it the right way. And thirdly, we need to learn from those who came before us, even if their perspective was not always right. We need to learn even from the mistakes made by others. So these are three reasons why it makes sense for us to study world peace. Now, in terms of who else has done it, well, in 1980 already there were 400 programs in the United States alone. And that number depends on how you count. It's not precise, but gives you an idea. There were many peace programs already then, and you can imagine today. Why did we need one more? The answer is what I already said, because it's really unique. Let's look at the options. What makes unification approach to peace different? Why can we say that it's indeed unique? Well, the first answer would be, well, actually nothing. We're just like everybody else, in which case we don't need it. Or maybe there's something, one thing that is unique. So at least one thing. Or you could say there's a lot of things that make us unique and that justify our existence. What is your answer? Well, that will be up to you. And the whole course is basically to help you give increasingly precise and complete answer to that question that I encourage you to ask yourselves. I will give you a very short answer at this point, which is my answer. All three are in a way correct. Nothing, well, in a way, we are no different from others, and this is just another program, peace studies, that allows you to study peace studies like others do in many other programs and universities around the US and around the world. That itself would be a good thing. But additionally, there's indeed something very special. And I would say it's related to the fact that this program and this institution, HGI, and unificationism as a whole, has been created by two people, Sun Myung Moon and Hak Chahan, to just call them by their name, who bring in a complete transformation of the human situation in a way comparable to the new beginning started by Jesus 2000 years ago, and to some degree others like Buddha and others. That is something that is a claim until proven true, and I believe it's being proven true gradually. But that is really what makes the whole difference. If it's not true, then it's just somebody who pretends, oh, we are the ones and we will change everything, and then nothing happens. If it is true, then we are indeed part of something that's dramatically new. And that's the point. Dramatically new and has a dramatically new perspective. So that's the something that's really different that should be able to make this course and the entire program in peace studies really groundbreaking. Not something that's maybe not immediately visible, but definitely should bring, in the end, results that cannot be brought by other approaches, that complements, and perfects other approaches. And then many things, well, because the way it happens is not just one way. I have this new to say, but many, many, many new insights and many, many, many new organizations. So all three are true in that sense. Now, teaching this course and generally considering unificationism and unificationism's approach to peace studies is challenging for one reason. It is so new. You know, history considers things from a distance. We can now look at the medieval period, 500 years ago, with a distance. The disadvantage is we cannot live at that time, so we cannot see with our own eyes. We have to use indirect information. But we have a distance, and from a distance, it's always easier in a way to see things in perspective, as we say. We are not blinded by the tree that's right in front of our face. But unificationism, it's ongoing now. So much of the material that we have about unificationism, including about peace studies, is informational and promotional. Basically, our websites. You take the websites of any unificationist organizations, it promotes it. And it informs people why we want to get attention and we want to inform people and convince them it's worth looking at this. It's worth joining us. It's not, there's no critical distance. So it's not really academic. That is a weak point. But there are still some scholarly sources that have even at this early stage been looking at unificationisms, but there are two types mostly. The first type is our sources. That means those among us who are scholars, like myself, can write scholarly articles about unificationism, but they can be expected to be totally positive. And others will say, well, it's normal. He's a unificationist. What he says is positive, but it's not objective. And we have to prove that it is objective. It's not easy. And the other kind are scholars who are extremely hostile and study as scholars. They are technically scholars, they're qualified, but study us from a very negative perspective. There are very few who have the dispassionate perspective that is necessary in academia. So the sources are limited. That's a challenge. It does make it impossible to look at what we are doing in an objective way, but it makes it a little bit difficult. So we have to be aware of that. And the third one is just the understanding that, or the conclusion that this is a common challenge when investigating an ongoing phenomenon. Every time something new happens, at the beginning, people struggle to have a really objective understanding of it. And, among the things that are happening and that are constantly changing in our movement, one affects us. UTS, that most of us have lived with for a long time, suddenly became HGI. So history is happening literally under our feet, under our eyes, but under our own feet. And since then, many other things have changed as well. Now, looking at what I said before, the few existing unificationist scholarly publications, essentially there have been two. One connected to PWPA, the International Journal on World Peace, discontinued a few years ago, has very interesting articles that uh, are written by usually non-unificationist scholars who are not even much aware of unificationists, but have been identified by the editors as being interesting and generally having a positive perspective on things that is compatible with our perspective. And so there are a lot of very good articles that were published over quite a period of time, quite some period of time. And one or the other will be used, of these articles will be used in our course. The second one is more directly related to unificationism. It's a journal called Journal of Unification Studies that has been published by UTS when it was still called Unification Theological Seminary. And the articles are mostly written by unificationist scholars like Dr. Thomas Ward, Dr. Michael Mickler, uh, myself, and others, and scholars who are very close to us and know us and offer a similar perspective. So we will use some of these articles that are very much academic in nature. Um, and so, but unfortunately, as you can see in the middle, at the top middle, in the middle, these are both discontinued. The second one, the Journal of Unification Studies, is something that is now lacking, an academic publication that is focused on what unificationism does. And we hope that soon there will be another one. The one on the left has been largely replaced by a new publication by HGI, the International Journal of for Peace and Public Leadership. It's way too long, IJPPL in short. You can go to the website of HGI and click on Journal at the top, and that will lead you to the first issue that we have published last year. And the second issue that is not, it's not there yet, but there's a call for papers, and it's being prepared now. I'm working on it as the editor, and that will also give in time a number of articles related to peace, not necessarily from our perspective, but from a perspective of that we identify as being of great interest related to our concerns, and we will use one or the other in our course as well. So now, having done that, I want to go briefly over the course description, which I usually don't do because you can read it. It's posted in the syllabus. That's what it is. It's long. I'm not going to look at it on this screen. I will go through it piece by piece because I think it gives you a good idea of what the course will involve. So first, the course covers approaches to peace based on the life and teachings of Dr. Sun Myung Moon and Hak Ja Han Moon, or today we would just say Hak Ja Han, and the work of the Family Federation for World Peace and Unification, and many other related organizations. Now, why this one first? Because nevertheless, even though our organizations that work directly for peace, like UPF, those are not the Family Federation, but nevertheless, the core teachings, the core insights, and also the core spirit or heart that is behind all these other organizations is found in the Family Federation, or previously called Unification Church, or more precisely, Holy Spirit Association for the Unification of World Christianity. So here you have both. You have the people, our founders on the left, and our community on the right. So continuing the reading of that course description, it considers the historical and theological foundations of unification approaches to peace. And I'll keep the second part of the sentence for the next slide. That means most foundationally, most basically, the divine principle, and then a more systematic, scholarly, or philosophical elaboration, unification thought. And then in terms of organizations, the one I've already introduced, a PWPA, which is academic and mostly published, mostly organized symposia, all kinds of academic meetings that then led to the publication of a number of works, of articles, books that deal with peace from a perspective of unificationism, or at least related to it. And this has happened, and there have been publications in Korea, of course, in Japan, in the United States, and even in Europe, and probably other parts of the world. And in Europe, I was briefly involved in doing just that. Now, the second part of the sentence, not just theoretical and theological foundations, but dealing with those particularly that are associated with conflict transformation and peace building. And that's what we have actually done. And we means first and foremost our founders. So how do you do peace building, and how do you transform conflict and transform enemies into friends? Well, the best examples we have had is the meeting with Kim Il-sung. I don't need to speak about it, we all know it. And then in the background, you have the first one that preceded it by a few years, or actually even less than a few years, the meeting with Mikhail Gorbachev. And then on the left, you can see that the current and former head of UPF International have, taken this on and done the same thing with important world leaders. This is Salva Kiir, the then and still president, longtime president of South Sudan. They were instrumental in getting him to participate in an event that was an important step towards peace in Sudan itself. Just one example. Continuing to read the syllabus course description, this course examines unification initiatives in the areas of, and there are many, but first and foremost, marriage and the family. We all know that's the key insight and the foundation for everything else. That's why I have put this picture there, which immediately shows, oh yes, we are different. We do bring something new. We all know it, but that picture alone is a proof. And then also ecumenism, interfaith, global affairs, media business, and sustainable development, the arts and culture, and education. You see, sustainable development is also a link to the United Nations, obviously. So that's all that and more. The things that unification is doing that are related to peace and that this course will study. And here is a list of initiatives, specific initiatives that are studied or will be studied include, and I'm not going to read them, that's just, you could say, almost a random list. There are many more, especially every year almost something new happens. So you can read it for yourself, and you will immediately see that some are missing. many are missing. And in particular, there are also many initiatives that are more internal, like the Chonshimwon is not mentioned because that's something that's internal to us, but it counts too in building a world of peace. Uh, and I will leave it at that. That forms the first learning outcome of this course, the first thing that is stated as one thing that you should get to learn in this course. And of course, you already have some knowledge of it, but anyway, that's the first learning outcome. What are we doing that's different? And the next few slides will be about that first learning outcome. The effort throughout this study will be to assess these and other efforts in a comparative perspective, thereby gaining an understanding of the space unificationism occupies as a peace movement and how it relates to contemporary peace thought and practice. I think that speaks for itself. The two pictures show comparative perspective. Well, we have the United Nations, that's the big institution that was created by the world at the end of World War II, that includes practically all nations today. And then we have our Summit Council and other similar events that are not quite as large, but have the capacity to do things that the UN, that is largely paralyzed, doesn't have. And you see here heads of states, heads of governments, and even the former Secretary General of the United Nations. So comparative perspective. Why do we need that? What does it bring that the other doesn't have? And so on. So that will be part of what we discuss. Continuing, the course will consider how the categories of realism and idealism apply to unification approaches to peace when considering issues like communism, human rights, or traditional values. You may be surprised to see that, but it makes sense. Realism and idealism have a general meaning. You know, the realist is the guy who's, that's the way it is, don't dream. I mean, let's be real. You know, that's the general approach of a realist. An idealist is somebody who thinks how the world should be, could be. The realist usually accuses the idealist of being a dreamer. You have nice dreams, but you forget where we are, and your dreams are never going to change anything. Let's be real again. And the idealist, on the other hand, tends to despise the realist because the idealist knows we need to get there. And the realist just is stuck in the dirt that surrounds him and tries to deal with it somehow in a selfish way and to get something out of it. So we have to bring these two together. But we have also to see how within our unificationist practice of working for peace, we include both, showing an ideal, but also dealing with the reality. One of the things you can see is we deal with lots of people. And when we deal, the people that we include in our activities, you look at them and then suddenly you realize, that person is not ideal. Does that person really have a place in our organization or activities? Do we deal with somebody like that? And the answer, we embrace everybody. But of course, we cannot let these people take over. So it's a delicate balance, very delicate balance. I don't need to give you names. You know, every time we try to embrace somebody in the political sphere, we embrace somebody who has most probably a huge ego, lots of personal ambition, and is maybe a little bit corrupt, you know, on the side, inevitably, because if we don't try to educate and help these people and encourage them to do good things with us, we are going to be alone forever. Actually, we ourselves are not even qualified because we are highly imperfect people. So that is a very interesting balance that we will have to look at. So all that was learning outcome one. That means what are we doing and what does it imply? The second learning outcome will be compare and contrast unification methodologies of peace and outcomes into more case studies of unification initiatives. In simple language, it means how do the outcomes of this course reflect on its vision and methods? Or even more simple, how well are we doing? Whenever you do something afterwards, you take a moment to think, how well have we been doing? Did we do well? Did we plan this well? But then when we did it, we didn't apply it very well. Or maybe the plan itself was not ideal. Or maybe the plan was great and we did great and we can clap and congratulate ourselves. And what can we do better next time? All these things. That's something we have to do. And you will have two occasions in this course to look at things in this way, to specifically analyze one particular project of unificationism from that perspective. How do we do based on our own stated goals? That's outcome 2. Outcome 3, demonstrate critical awareness of the space unificationism occupies as a peace movement and how it relates to contemporary peace thought and practice. Simplified, how do unification approaches relate to existing peace studies? Why do we even need to exist? That answers that question that we have already asked. And again, in your specific investigations in this course on specific initiatives, you will have ample opportunity to discuss that, even actually week after week in discussions and other smaller work that you will do. You will have ample occasion to answer that question. And then fourth and finally, students are encouraged to relate course content to their personal and professional commitments. That is something that actually every course always tends to put there, not only our courses, but because after all, you are not just studying to study, but studying to do something with it once you graduate, right? But in this course, particularly, and also you are not going to probably be encouraged to apply all this because you're already doing it. Some of you have already in your area more expertise than I have. Some of you are already doing this and have been doing this for years and even decades. So you don't need encouragement. The encouragement is mostly to use what this course offers you and help you do it even better and consider things from a new perspective. That's what it is. And of course, if some of you have been doing other things, perfectly legitimate, it certainly would encourage you to become a peace scholar or peace activist in one way or another. Certainly, even in your daily life. So that ends this opening presentation, and I hope it gave you a little bit of an idea of what is waiting for us, for you and for me together. We are going to do that together, and I'm going to learn from you a lot. I always do. And I wish you a happy week and a happy course.